Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And I'm just sorry that this is the last session for you. I wish there was more time to talk about these ideas. Probably I'm going to leave you with a lot of questions to go forward with your own research, which is also a nice thing, not to have all your questions answered, I guess, which you managed to do in the previous talks. So I hope this raises useful theories, practices that you can take with you. So let me see if I can share my screen. Looks okay?
Yes.
Okay. So let me start by saying that when I wrote the abstract, and I don't know how many people read the abstract these days, nobody has time, but I was worried about one phrase or sentence I was using that it might create some controversy. I said, both the local and the translocal are post-silencing for multilingual scholars like me. And some of you might have said, what's wrong with the local? Local is good. Local is authentic. Local is voice. Local is identity. So I thought I should get it out of the way, but then I also realized that's the theme for this whole talk. So it's good to get it out of the way. So why I said that is that, especially in academic writing, which I was thinking about when I was thinking about this talk, not writing for my local community in, say, in fiction or something, or poetry, but trying to write to the academic community. Writing and also speaking are always mediated by a lot of other things, by genre conventions, language norms. So there's nothing personal. Everything is social and ideological. So, I'm go back to an essay by Foucault that I read when I was a graduate student, which has remained with me as shaped my thinking about it. It's an essay he published in 1972 in translation, A Discourse on Language. Actually, this was his inaugural lecture when he became a professor in Paris. This is a lecture he gave, which then it became an article. And he starts the lecture by saying, I have two choices or temptations. One is, he called it intuition. I want to speak from my intuition, which is almost like, I want to speak from my heart. I want to just say what I want to say. The second temptation is institution. And what he meant by that is, there are certain clearly laid genre conventions, norms for how this lecture should be delivered. And I can just take it over and I can just frame my thinking in terms of the accepted norms. So both are easy options. Either intuition, speak from your heart, say what you want, or institution, there are norms here. Just take the template and fix your thoughts into it. But both are silencing because the institution, you're letting the institution speak and not you speaking, right? If you do the institutional option. Intuition option is, it's mediated. There's nothing called private speech. Of course, it can be private, but it's not going to be a talk. It can be for your personal purposes. You can talk to yourself. But if this is a lecture, then intuition is not an option also, because you have to mediate, it has to be mediated by so many other social ideological conventions. So he went on to say, the word discourse in its root means two words, dia and course. Dia is two, course is running between 2 points. So what he said is, discourse always involves running between 2 points, between established genres, conventions, norms, and what we want to say in terms of our identity, voice. So that's why I said both the local and the translocal are not good options for me. And the key word for this lecture is negotiation. So this particular orientation that I introduced from Foucault has also been discussed in post-colonial contexts, especially writing. So I hope the screen moved now. See a different screen? Thank you. So And this also was very early in my life. So I was an undergraduate student in Sri Lanka doing English major, as we call it there, or honors. Major is how they call it in the United States. Honors is how we call it in Sri Lanka in English literature. So at the end of the 4 years of study, I have to write a big article. It's like almost they call it a thesis. And thank God I chose African writers in English. I'm so happy about it because they encountered these very political and difficult questions much earlier than a lot of us in India and South Asia were talking about it. So apparently, Achebe and Ngugi had this debate in 1956 in a conference of African writers in Kampala, and it has gone on even now. So, but these are from later writings, and you can see three different positions about how to use English for creative writing by post-colonial writers. Achebe's position is, you might call it both instrumentalist and agentive. Instrumentalist in the sense that he feels English is just a tool. I can do anything I want. I can say anything I want. And then agentive in the sense, I will just go on talking about my experiences and the language will be changed by itself. So all of them are open for hybrid Englishes, but of course they position themselves differently in terms of how this hybridity develops. But Achebe thinks it'll happen naturally when I just keep saying what I want to say. Ngugi, I've taken this quotation from his 1990 book, Decolonizing the Mind. And as you know, in the book, he argues, this is my last book in English. Hereafter, you have to read my work in translation. The reason is, he argues, even to protest in English is not to protest at all, because the language and its norms and ideologies take over. But I want to say it furthers the power of English. So in this quotation, of course, he makes a case for not writing in English, but actually writing in other languages so that he can say what he wants to say and resist and engage in his language activism that way. But the position I really like, and that I'm going to maybe elaborate on, is the position by the third writer, Gabriel Okada. He's a poet in Nigeria. And he accepts that language is not an innocent medium to play with, because he says that this language will make us be seen through a distorting mirror in the middle of his quotation, right? So it's not innocent. But on the other hand, he doesn't feel you can be innocent and casual about the hybridity. Or he also doesn't agree with Ngugi that there is no power for individual writers to change the language. So he goes on to say, we can engage in a continuing quest through experimentation for developing a type of English, which is, of course, a hybrid English, because he uses the word emulsify. The African values and interests will emulsify English and make it a different English. But he feels people have the agency to do that. You might call it a qualified agency. But I also like this word continuing quest. It's not one time and it's over. It's an ongoing challenge to negotiate with English, to make it more suitable for our purposes, to diversify it from within and make it more democratic for all users. Now, this very debate is still happening in the field of second language writing. So, of course, you might see that I'm changing the metaphors a little bit. Started with intuition and institution with Foucault, went on to agency and dominant ideologies in the African writers. I'll change it a little bit to agency and structure here. And I have kind of laid out my position of negotiation, developing from all the influences I mentioned earlier in this book, in this 2002 book, 2002 book, Critical Academic Writing and Multilingual Students, where I argue that although we have to take the genre conventions and grammatical norms of English seriously in academic writing, but we can also engage with these norms to pluralize them, to change them, to suit our purposes and interests. But this position has come under a lot of criticism from a lot of other well-minded, well-meaning scholars. So the first criticism, I call it structure, but it has two different orientations. I call it the one line of thinking, a conservative line of thinking. And what these scholars say is diversification for multilingual writers is too early and wrong because it's going a little too far. Norms are important. Norms are what they need. There are various things related to this argument. One of the things they say is second language students or multilingual students, for them, it's too early to talk about diversity. They don't even know the norms. Secondly, diversity in writing is not possible. Diversity in speech is possible, but writing is always rule governed because you need shared norms in order to make meaning when this writing is read translocally. They would also go on to say, all our ESL students want English, native speaker English. They don't want diversity, etc. I don't want to argue with their position, but just to illustrate where they are coming from. But the second group, the progressive school group, argues against the negotiation position for a different reason. And in this essay, Rigo Kubota and a graduate student, Heng Arts, talk about how they encourage their multilingual students and scholars to bring in their voices and their styles into writing, in publishing, but they always get punished by reviewers and editors because they say this is going too far, or they think this is non-native writing. So they end up arguing you have to change the rules first. You have to change the institutions first. You have to change publishing policies first before you start talking about diversity in the text. So they're coming to it, but both of them believe in the structures of writing, publishing, communication as more important than what people can do agentively in their everyday communication and writing. But the second position I illustrate is by Kate Cadman. She's an Australian scholar, and she says the negotiation position is not going far enough because what she says is writing from students she advises in South Africa and Australia. What she says is they need voice. They should be allowed to write the way they want. The negotiation position is still making a concession to norms. The negotiation position still makes compromises to norms. We don't want that compromise. We want students to be able to be free to talk the way they want to talk or write the way they want to write. So there's a small funny aside that I later realized after I put this slide together. All four writers criticize me personally. Actually, the first two articles are completely about me. So it's funny, you can read it. The others allude to my position as it's not going far or it's going too far. I love that because this shows you that I'm trying to negotiate both positions. And what I wanted to say at the end of this presentation is there is a way to resolve structure and agency that the negotiation position takes seriously the concerns of both streams of scholars on both sides, that I'm not disregarding their concerns. But maybe let me quickly say, it's difficult to argue with the positions of different scholars. I feel all of them are progressive scholars, right? I know them personally, they're all progressive scholars. So even in the progressive group of teachers, educationists, there is room for diversity. And I'm happy to accept that. But eventually, I think what all this will come down to is our subject position, our background. And let me confess, I am being very pragmatic for a reason. I come from Sri Lanka, a small island. I am a multilingual, speaks many languages, but is always mistaken for being a non-native speaker. You know, I am saying that, I started using English the same time as I used Tamil and Sinhala. So I don't know whether I'm non-native. Yeah, I do. I did learn the language at a very, very young age. Sri Lanka is a British colony, so English was already there before I was born for about 200 years. But even if we take the fact that I'm a non-native speaker, and that's how people judge me, probably because of my accent and even the accent in my writing, I am being pragmatic and cautious. I want to engage with the norms cautiously and seriously. So you might say, and also I have a sense of responsibility for the multilingual students I teach. I don't want them to fail. I want them to also move cautiously. But I'm not disregarding change, radical change, institutional change, but I'm coming to it slowly, gradually. So I just wanted to say, this is my subject position, I guess, from where I come from, my identity. So for example, Kate Cadman, I think, is Anglo person, and I don't know Anglo, what nationality she has. She might have migrated to Australia from somewhere else, but she's definitely, I've met her and had conversations with her. So a lot of times I find that people who are native speakers or Anglo-American are much more radical than me. And I can totally understand that. That's their subject position. They have a right to say what they want to say, given who they are. But I am a lot more careful about my position. But before I move on to talk about how with this position I kind of navigate structure and agency and resolve them at least from my point of view, for my teaching, I want to say that even the negotiation position is not one thing. I have been changing, progressing in my own way, in my own writing and in my teaching, in framing the negotiation differently. Here again, it's partly because the moment we start activist work in teaching differently, writing differently, the game changes, the conversation changes. The next writing, I can do something more. In the next publication, I can do something even further. And now that these things start publishing, I might be able to do even more in my classroom. So what I'm saying is there's something temporal about our positions, about how our positions change. I'm saying it's not because I am a wishy-washy person who is unstable. I'm saying that's the nature of politics. That's the nature of discourse. Every time we start acting and speaking, the scene changes, and then we are able to do something more. I still believe strongly in negotiation, but it doesn't mean one thing. It's kind of evolving, it's progressing. So let me illustrate that. This is one of the first articles I wrote after I migrated to the United States to teach in the City University of New York. You can see my institutional affiliation. It was an invitation from these two ESL scholars for a lot of multilingual scholars like me to talk about how we have developed in our writing ability. So I want to illustrate how I took the norms of English seriously, the grammatical norms, but I brought in a different voice, style, genre conventions. So as you can see from the very first page, I start with a quotation of a poem by Derek Walcott. So I'm bringing poetry into academic discourse. Then I start with a narrative about how I first became aware of English in my family life. And then I go on the next page before I go on to narrate my development as a multilingual writer. In the very end of the second paragraph, that is page 24, at the very in that paragraph, I am giving my thesis statement. In the United States, the thesis is very important. You have to declare it upfront in the very opening. So after I started with my narrative about my family and how I learned the power of English, I go on to say, it is this way that I also learned my writing over time through language socialization, by observing and making inferences and developing in my style. And then I go on to say, I'll just read the very final lines. Perhaps there are secrets of everyday learning characterized by reflective understanding, strategic thinking, and contextual reasoning that are at the heart of any educational experience. They sustain me as I negotiate, keyword, the communicative traditions in Tamil and English, not to mention the hybrid discourses of diverse institutions and contexts as I continue to develop a literate voice as a bilingual. I just wanted to point out that I am respecting the need for the thesis statement or declaring your argument up front, though I don't like it. I actually hate it. From our Tamil point of view, we just want to develop the narrative indirectly rather than declare the moral of the story up front. It destroys the story when you give the moral right away, right? But I'm making a concession to the American norms. But even at the language, though I say that I'm taking the grammatical norms of English seriously, there are no non-grammatical kind of uses or Sri Lankan English up to this point. Even then, maybe HB is true. We can't avoid our voice, our styles, our different grammars in our writing. So I just take for close analysis one paragraph in this essay where I go on to talk about I learned English academic norms as a graduate student in the United States. Then I returned to Sri Lanka. And when I tried to practice the norms from the American writing, my local students and scholars hated me. So in this paragraph, that's the context. So I introduced certain local conventions that are important, that are violated. And I highlighted this in red. It's called Avai Adakam. It's a Tamil word to mean you have to be humble in front of your audience. You have to hold yourself as an inferior when you speak. You shouldn't be authoritative. So what I said is my thesis statement was getting misinterpreted as too pompous and overconfident. So because they wanted humility. And then I also used the word avai and say it is probably started in feudal times when a person speaks in front of the court. But note, I'm transliterating the words and also interpreting them. Later on, I will write them in Tamil without translation. I haven't grown up to that point yet. Okay, but even in style, there are certain things that I now recognize that I'm bringing from the Tamil oral tradition. In Tamil oral discourse, which is also very popular in academic discourse, we like repetitions and alliterations. And I don't have to go into orality to tell you why orality prefers redundancies, alliterations, repetitions, etc. So I have highlighted a few other words that I use here: self-conscious, self-centered, self-confident, that maybe a lot of American readers would say, that's redundant, just one word is enough. But I'm doing something that is kind of pleasing to me, I guess. Same thing with planned, disciplined, organized, same thing, okay, but I need it, okay. And certain other words, which I've highlighted in purple, might be considered too expressive, too extreme. And I get criticized for that also. That is, I'm not putting things in a very guarded, balanced, controlled way. So here I'm saying that my American style of writing was misinterpreted as styleless, mechanical writing. Nothing is styleless, nothing is mechanical. Everything has some style. It's a different style. Or I said my way of beginning with a thesis statement was interpreted as a cocksure way of beginning the essay. Cocksure might be a little too strong for being too self-centered, but I engaged in very expressive, over the top, they would say in the United States, style of writing. So there are still marks of hybridity in my early writing, although I didn't mess with grammar. But I also wanted to say that even though I had that kind of prose, the ones I have highlighted in green, I also bring a lot of academic prose. I use words like meta-talk, ethos, encoding, and also citations and technical terms like the CARS model of John Swales. So there's a lot of hybridity in the language. You might call it not at the level of grammar, but at the level of register. You know, the academic register, narrative register, expressive register, etc. But things started changing. This was after I migrated to the United States. I saw an African-American writer, Jennifer Smitherman, writing like this. Some of you might know her as a celebrated African-American sociolinguist who has made a lot of arguments for why Black English should be accepted as logical, as rule-governed, like any other English in the United States. But this is how she writes. So I have highlighted in red where she is actually messing with grammar. She's actually changing or violating. I'll start using the word standard written English. It's not native speaker English, but people think in the United States in the composition scene, they say SWE, standard written English, is just a universal writing norm. Wherever you come from, this is the accepted. Some people use the word careful academic prose, meaning it's, or edited academic prose. Some people even use the word edited American English. To talk about, it may not be native, but it's careful. But Geneva Smitherman is even violating that. So you might say the first line I've underlined here, grammatically, you would say CCC had lost its cotton picking mind. There are multiple violations. And if you know Black English, done is used as a participle, past participle form to indicate an action that was already done. And there's a metaphor here. You know, in the South, when slaves were picking cotton, this is the way to insult people. What's happened to your cotton keeping in mind? You've gone crazy. So she's taking this one lot to a whole nother level, shall I say? That's another word she uses, which is not grammatical. That is, but it really means a lot, right? She's not just taking this to the next level. She's taking to a whole nother level by playing with grammar. So I wrote an essay about this, analyzing her writing in the College Composition and Communication in 2006. And I tried to make a connection to multilingual writing. But they said is what Geneva Smitherman is doing with African-American English, maybe students and scholars of world Englishes can also do. That is, bring your Sri Lankan English or Indian English into your writing, because you know, I think from Geneva Smitherman's point, and some other African scholars have also talked about it, the first person who used the term for this kind of writing, code meshing, is Bershon Young. He's a young African-American scholar. And what he said was, we have been taught to use Black English at home and standard American English in the classroom. And he called this a code switching model, not in the sociolinguistic sense, but as a metaphor. That is, you have to switch between your vernacular outside the classroom and the normative grammar inside the classroom. So he said, what if we code mesh? Bring my African-American English into the academic text. So Geneva Smitherman is doing exactly that. And I used the word code meshing and developed it in this essay, but also said maybe multilinguals can also do that because we have other varieties of English. But note in the second page, in the very center here, I hope you can see my cursor. In the second page is actually the last page of this essay. I just scanned both the first and the last page. There is a moment of self-reflection on my part. I noticed that I'm growing too. So I say, I must confess that I have myself held such positions, that is, world English doesn't belong to the academic text in the past. The extent to which my radicalism extended previously was to argue for alternative tone, style, organization, and genre conventions. And that's what you saw in my previous essay, right, in 2001. So, and then at the end of the essay, I try to practice what Geneva Smitherman does in the very last line. And I say, from here on, I'm going to also experiment with this writing with a lot of our students. I'm like a student. I'm a teacher now, but I'm learning how to bring my voice into academic essays. But I use a lot of Sri Lankanisms here. From Sri Lankan English. I say, I am hereby humbly announcing that I'll be joining my esteemed students in the classroom for learning how to accommodate local Englishes in academic writing. There are, I think, 3 times I used the ing form because in India and Sri Lanka, we love it. We actually say we are loving it. So for every stative verb, which is an experience where you shouldn't use the ing form, we use the ing form. This is smelling good. This curry is smelling great, right? That's wrong grammar. but perfectly logical in Sri Lankan and Indian English. So I'm using the ing form. But also, I discuss in the essay a particular type of English. It's called a highly differential English. It's called Babu English, because this is how we were taught to communicate with British administrators. So I humbly request, sir, I request from your majesty, and this is not the queen, it's just the governor, right? So all the teacher, we say, I humbly request you, madam professor, which is an elementary school teacher, right? Okay, so, but you have to humble yourself. So I'm kind of demonstrating this. So I am also ready to take this one step further in the level of grammar. So I'm negotiating a bit further. Things changed when I started teaching. This is 2008. I'm teaching a course in Penn State called Teaching Second Language Writing. One of the assignments I have is for people to write their autoethnography. How did you become multilingual and literate in your life? Because my argument was that if you are conscious and reflexive about your own evolution as a multilingual writer, you will become a good multilingual teacher because you will know your own struggles, your own practices, your own challenges. So it's a semester-long activity, and this is not the first draft, but around the sixth draft, this Saudi Arabian student, she wrote about 12 drafts, started writing like this. She started using Arabic in her English. Now, none of us in the class knew Arabic. A lot of them were native speaker students, and I'm from Sri Lanka, I don't know Arabic, but we all understood what was going on here. So we knew that this looks like it's from a poem. It looks like it's an epigraph. I'll tell you how we made those inferences, if it is not common sense. And then if it's an epigraph, it talks about what's to come later, what she describes in English. So we can guess that there is some relevance in terms of theme here. And we all started working, and then other students started doing the same thing. They brought their own languages into English writing. So at this point, my philosophy changed. And what I started thinking is, standard English is not a thing. It doesn't have a life of its own outside. We created standard English. Standard English has words from so many languages, from Swedish, Norwegian, Tamil, lots of languages. How did this come to be treated as pure, normative, standard English? It's purely ideology, language ideology. It's not something ontological. Language doesn't exist out there in one state, in one stage, and then starts controlling what we do. Ontologically, what happens is there are only flowing, free-floating words that people take over and put together these languages, which eventually become standardized with language ideology. So I became open to the possibility of continuing what has happened to English all along, borrowing from multiple languages, and things get absorbed into certain particular communicative practices without regard to which language it is coming from. That's the whole history of English. So I became comfortable with this. And then at the end of my courses of this nature, many courses, I thought I should put together students' own experimentation with writing in this book that came out last year. Initially, I wanted to just talk about how we always talk about celebrated writers, professors like Geneva Swiderman, or literary writers that Stephen Kellman talks about as translingual writers. But students are doing it all the time. And if you can show that this is a type of activity that students are participating, engaging in, maybe it'll empower teachers to know how to do this. So I also try to, in this book, describe my class, what I did in order to make this writing possible. But just a quick note on the word translingual, which we haven't defined, and I'm sure you have been discussing for this course. When I started, even that word has been changing in meaning all the time for me. But when I started, I was thinking simply in terms of trans as beyond labeled languages, that communication, whether in speech or writing, always involves code semiotic resources from a lot of places beyond labeled languages. So trans only in that sense, and I will later show at the end of this in a couple of more slides, trans also went on to mean trans beyond language itself, to including, that's the reason I used the word semiotic resources earlier and not languages, because trans not beyond just words to other multimodal resources, the space, the ecology, the setting, all of these are engaged in writing. So when I put together this book, what I realized was I can't just have a simple introduction, because I'm promoting literacy autobiographies or autoethnographies as a good pedagogical tool. So maybe I should write my own literacy autobiography as the introduction. So this is a kind of a book in two parts. The first is my literacy autobiography, where I also describe my classroom, my pedagogy, and what I'm learning. But one thing I want you to notice this, you can see the translingualism in the students, but you can see this from Natalia's title. She's Argentinian, she's trilingual, she learned French when she was in Argentina in addition to English, and you can see she's in the title itself, she is using French. The others, they use the other languages in their essays itself. But in my case, I'm using Tamil now. I'm writing it in the titles. You can see it, and I'm waiting for the reader to go into the text or into the chapter for the meanings. But something happened. My fourth and final shift in my learning curve, I changed one more time beyond translingual. What I found from what the students were doing was they were not focusing on the meanings of the words alone in trying to unpack this Arabic from Buthena. So let's go back to an example. What we did was we tried to unpack Arabic in the context of the whole ecology of the interaction. I'll unpack the word ecology in a minute, but in a very limited way, what's happening here is we are looking at the text, the way the text is structured, the way the words are spaced. So from the spacing, we know a couple of things. This looks like it's a poem. There seems to be a parallelism in the way it's written. Then the section divider is another resource that tells us everything that comes after the section divider is a new vignette in this narrative that Buthena is doing. So we interpreted this as hard work pays. And at the end of the essay, at the end of the course, I interviewed Buthena in a stimulated recall, and she said, actually, this is a poem about how pearl divers dive into the ocean all through the night, and in the morning they come up with pearls as they are rewarded. Okay, we didn't get the metaphor, but we came close enough. We guessed the meaning. But do you all understand Shakespeare when you read his text? No, we don't understand it. I'm sorry, I should have said, do you understand every single word of Shakespeare when you read? Do you understand every single word of Jan Blomaert or Linus Silo? No, he uses Bourdieu and so many people. You don't have to. You can still understand the text without understanding every word. So, and then if you go back to what was happening in the class around these texts, I found a lot of negotiation going on. So I'm now also expanding the term negotiation, not to negotiating the interpretation of the text between me and the text, but I'm also thinking in terms of the people around the text, interpreting the words in relation to a lot of other resources in the text. So I'll just give you quick examples where I'm running out of time. Mike and Yunja, Mike was actually a native English speaker student. They are also working hard to unpack this Arabic. So they actually look at just the beauty of Arabic, the calligraphy, and they say, that's great. You know, I like that. I may not understand what it is. So I think what they're doing is they're expanding the meaning of literacy beyond just the literal meaning to the aesthetic side or the performative side. You know, what does, maybe even looking at words as an artifact. The word is not for a meaning. It's an object of beauty, and we should enjoy that as well. Or let's move further down to Tim and Christy, both of them native speaker students. Tim says, it's difficult, and maybe the difficulty teaches me that I am disadvantaged here. I'm powerless. She's more powerful. Part of the side story here is Butena's literacy in Autobiography was about how, as a non-native speaker, she was in a position of disadvantage so many times in schools in the United States because people were laughing at her. So it's almost like she's turning the tables now and saying, what does it feel like for you, native speakers, to wrestle with my Arabic? How do you feel? So Christy actually goes one step further. She changes her mind. There's learning going on in front of the text. She said, last week, I wanted her to translate it, but this week, I think she shouldn't translate it because this is her identity and she's teaching us something. So you can see a lot of different meanings coming up, meaning as not just literal, but meaning as identity, meaning as performative. It's doing something to you. The text is doing something to you. Meaning as aesthetic. That is, it's about the beauty. So the students are expanding the meanings of literacy, but also expanding the resources they have to unpack the meaning beyond just words. They're not worried about the Arabic. That's beside the point. There's much more than Arabic in this text. So that made me think, why are we making a huge fuss about just a single word of Sri Lankan Tamil or Sri Lankan English on a text? There are so many resources to unpack it. So if you think about the text in such a rich, ecological way, you might be comfortable with taking this negotiation further, and that's why I had Tamil in my book, where I'm expecting readers to negotiate in the context of a lot of other resources, the spacing, the font, the clues inside. So let me recap the 4 trajectories I have talked about. I'm not stuck on these terms. I was just thinking out loud to see how I might just describe my own progression. You might describe it slightly differently. But I started with the traditional idea in world Englishes that grammatical norms, especially the norms of the native speakers, have to be taken seriously. Our Sri Lankan English or Indian English is just a variation. But when it comes to writing in world Englishes, we only allowed for style, organization, etc., but not grammar. But in the second move, the code meshing move, the grammar is still important, but we think of other grammars like Black English or Sri Lankan English as not just a variation, but ideological, meaning it's not saying the same thing in different ways. Black English or Sri Lankan English is saying something more, saying something different. Including, for example, our identity. It's saying something about the identity that Standard English wouldn't say. But more than that, ideologically and also in this sense, as I mentioned, the Black scholars said, if you ask us to keep Black English for home and standard written English for classroom, you are exacerbating this inequality. You are saying Black English is not suitable for school. It's you're saying Black English is deficient. You are saying Black English is inferior. So there is also a political thing going on, and that's why we want to bring them closer. But the third move is an ontological one. I feel that we shouldn't think of grammar as already there, set in stone, preordained, predefined, but that's being constructed by us. And I'm able to bring in other languages into my text. But finally, I think of diversity in terms of all the resources out there. Diversity is also embodied about who we are. And therefore, even if you don't understand the meaning of some words, you have to think about what it means about me saying these things in terms of my identity. And also look at everything about my body, my voice, my accent, my country. And I should go back to the very first essay I showed you. Like in most essays, they are preceded by, in that case, by a photograph and also by a biographical note. Would readers use that as a clue to unpack my meaning? They should, they will. And that's part of meaning making. I use the word new materialist here because in the past, we used to think of artifacts and other resources as lifeless, having no agency. They are dead. Language has meaning. Language has life. Human beings have meaning. Human beings have life. But now we are engaging in a more equal process of participating in meaning making with all these resources. So I want to then conclude with this final dilemma I posed in the meaning. So it's clear that my notion of negotiation is still progressing thanks to all the advances that came before with students, scholars, writers from other ethnic groups who have made way with their gradual changes. But then maybe philosophically, things are also changing in the academic world. We are prepared to think of multimodality, ecological resources now more than in 2001 and 2006. But I want to also say the negotiation position doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't participate in institutional policy changes, norm changes. I think it's fairly clear for you up to this point that I'm taking the norm seriously. Because the word negotiation means, it often gets misinterpreted, by the way, by a lot of scholars, especially in the second language group, who think negotiation doesn't means you're not taking grammar or norms seriously. What I tell them is negotiation means there is something to negotiate with, or we don't need the word negotiation. It's free for all. Do anything you like. Negotiation means there's something to play with, something to deal with, or we won't negotiate. So I do take the norms seriously. So I can theoretically talk about a lot of different frameworks that would allow us to think about the type of changes people individually make as students, scholars, writers, speakers every day that participate in both structure and agency. Like you all remember, Anthony Giddens in 1984 used the word structuration rather than structure or agency. That is, look at also how structures are being made by people and interactions on day-to-day life. Or I can draw from human geography, scalar metaphors, that when we talk about structure, we're always talking about the very macro scale, when norms are already predefined, put down in books, in journal guidelines and school policies, etc. But there's another way to also look at how norms are evolving day to day, how they are practiced, negotiated at a very local scale. Classroom, Monday morning, 8 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. Something happening there. But we don't seem to have a language to talk about these different scales of interaction and analysis. But since it's Friday evening and you guys are ready for the wine, I'll conclude with two images that will capture this paradox that we see. So the first is from structuralist linguistics. You're familiar with it, but I'm going to repurpose it for my goals here. The three sets of traffic lights here don't have the same light everywhere. That is, the yellow in the second light is much brighter than the yellow in the others. The green in the third light is much brighter than the green in the other lights. That doesn't mean that when you drive through these traffic lights, you say, I'm not going to stop in this traffic light because this yellow is different from the previous yellow, right? So I use this example to teach my students. Actually, these are examples I use in some of my classes. A couple of things about writing and norms. The first is, no text or communicative act resembles the norm. Even standard English is an approximation. Nobody speaks standard English. There's accent that is different for all of us. In a conversation like this, I don't have complete sentences. Nobody has, right? So it's an approximation. Secondly, a variation in one dimension doesn't destroy the whole. It's the pattern that matters. So if you use one word in Arabic in a standard English text, that doesn't mean it's not an academic text. It's still academic text because of the whole genre, the pattern that is involved. And finally, this is the greatest paradox that I find very difficult to communicate to the critics. It is possible to accommodate diversity while respecting the norms. You can have it both ways. It's not impossible. Look at the traffic lights. It's rule governed, but it's also different. And no text is the same. So let me ask you, I showed you John Swales' CARS model and a lot of other studies he has done to describe the genre of RA, research article. Still, it's just a template because the research article in education will be different from linguistics. The research article within applied linguistics in different journals, in TESOL Quarterly, is different from a modern language journal. So what I'm saying is, it doesn't mean John Swales is doing the wrong thing. It's good for him to give us the norm as an approximation, as a template. But if you follow it, you're going to be silenced, like Foucault said. It'll be a mechanical parrot-like writing. It won't suit your purposes. So this explains to my students that it's possible to have diversity and norm. But the next example I want to show you is to show that it's possible to have norms changing and you participating in those norm changes. And this is the Xenos arrow paradox. So the Greek philosopher Zeno is a mischievous guy. He posed all kinds of silly questions that troubled our minds. And he asked, is the arrow stationary or is it moving? If it is stationary, always at one place or time in a moment, the idea that it is moving, that is mobile, is illusion. You're just imagining it. It's just stationary at different places, right? So I know you can go on endlessly arguing, but the short and long of this is, it's a paradox. It's at different places and times at different points, but it's also moving. But here's the problem with the scalar kind of dilemma for us. We see the arrow when it is shot, and we see it when it lands on the target. We focus on the beginning point and end point, but nobody is talking about all the in-between points, thousands of them. Or I don't know how many minutes it takes to travel, even if it is 1 minute, the 60 seconds and everything that happens. We don't have a language to talk about it. And that's why we sometimes ignore the moment-to-moment changes that are involved in norm making and genre making. So this helps me teach my students, norms are never stable. They're just stabilized for now. And every time you write or speak, you're reshaping the norm, because no act is the same. Well, here we can go to Heraclitus, I guess. Is he the person who said we can't step into the same river twice? So, and it's true for writing and speech also, even in our personal writing, no article is the same. It's all context governed. It's all mediated by so many different considerations. And finally, then, the tentative stages toward the norm. Here I'm thinking of norm breaking. The fact that you might break the norm doesn't mean it's meaningless or it doesn't have a function. It's participating in the creation of a new norm. So let me give you a simple example. For a long time in the United States, they said you can't use words like Xeroxing or Xeroxed. You can't make a verb out of it, because Xerox is the name of a company with a capital X. So how can you make verbs out of a pronoun? Okay, now you will find them in academic articles, Xeroxing and Xeroxed. What happened? We know one point when it was marked as wrong by teachers and reviewers and editors. We know another point now, maybe 50 years later, it's acceptable. What happened in between? Somebody broke the norm and still succeeded. Of course, some people failed. That happens. We have to be ready for that. So a norm changing does require failure, does involve failure, does involve sacrifice, but also involves progress. So these two examples are to show you that although I'm evolving in my position of negotiation, it is still a process that takes norms seriously. It is a simple pragmatic point, even a sociolinguistic point, that in all acts of communication, there are certain genre conventions, certain grammatical and language conventions that help us organize that activity. So I take it seriously, I take it for granted, and then work with that. But the act of creatively engaging with those norms is not conformity. It's also changing the structure, it's changing the norms. And I would agree with others, we have to also engage at the level of institutions to lobby for changes at that level. But my work has mostly been as a teacher and a writer to work at the textual level. I love that engagement of moment-to-moment speaking, writing, analyzing these cases for these norm changes. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.